Always to be part of anything that the Memphis School of Preaching is hosting. I am deeply grateful to the Forest Hill congregation and to the Memphis School of Preaching for the time I was able to enjoy here in school. That was 2 of the best years of my life. It was an honor for me to sit at the feet of those instructors, and I just can't say enough about what that meant to the course of my life. And so just wanted to start with that. We have been given the charge to preach the gospel, and that charge has been encapsulated in our theme for this seminar, Send the Light. And when I think about those words, send the light, I immediately think about the song that we so very often sing, and I particularly always think about these particular words. We have heard the Macedonian call today, send the light, send the light. That Macedonian call, it's recorded there in Acts chapter 16, verse 9, and a vision appeared unto Paul in the night. There stood a man of Macedonia and prayed him, saying, come over into Macedonia and help us. Well, brethren, I know I'm not alone when I say this. I wish it was in reality as it was in this dream or in this vision, that people were begging, that needed the light, were begging us to come preach it to them. But that's not really what Paul found when he got to Macedonia, and that's not generally the case of what we will find when we go to preach the gospel unto others. The reason for that, I believe, is that people really do not understand that they need the gospel. They don't really comprehend the relationship that they have with God or the lack thereof. They don't understand the benefits that they can receive from having the gospel in their lives. And they don't certainly understand how to receive it. Well, that's our challenge. And the difficulty of that challenge is that we have to introduce these thoughts to a very cynical society. One that has grown accustomed to corruption, to being lied to fake news, to being taken advantage of. A society where everyone seems to have an angle, everyone seems to have an ulterior motive. And so we must learn how to gain their trust before they will ever have any reason to listen to anything we have to say. And so today, we're going to talk about how we can do that. My purpose today will be to offer us some very practical helps in reaching hard-to-reach people. The charge to preach the gospel includes going forth to all nations and to all ethnicities. But as it touches our lesson in this hour, that charge includes going to those in our own backyard, those in the urban areas of Memphis, Tennessee, and other similar areas. But before we talk about that specifically, I want to talk about the challenge, some things related to Paul's missionary journey, some things that I think we can learn from him. You realize that Paul, when he visited various different congregations in various different cities, he often varied his approach from one location to another. Now, he had his preferred methods, which included going into the synagogue and reasoning with them from the scriptures. But that wasn't always possible. That wasn't always expedient. And so sometimes, like for example, when he got to Philippi, they didn't have a synagogue. They apparently didn't have a large enough Jewish population in the city to have one. And so what did he do? He went down to the river. He found people worshiping there according to the traditions that started back in captivity. And then when he got to the city of Athens, he found a pagan culture. And so rather than reasoning with them from the scriptures, he took a Christian evidences approach on that occasion. And then when he got to the big cities like Ephesus and Corinth, what did he do there? He spent years with those brethren and faced some of the most difficult struggles, obstacles, and problems he ever faced. And the point that I'm trying to make from all this is that even though there are principles of evangelism that will remain the same no matter what our audience, who our audience or what area we are in, there's also situations that we must learn to adapt in order to reach our audience. There are certain factors, social, cultural, economic, that make some areas, some audiences more difficult to deal with. And so different approaches, then it's logical to assume that some approaches might be more advantageous. Defining our topic, or our target as it were in this lesson, inner cities. What do we mean by this term, inner cities? Well, generally this term is used in reference to the older, more central part of a city. Those areas as opposed to the suburbs and the rural areas outside of the cities. You see, as cities grow, the people tend to move outward away from the inner cities because of the overcrowding, but then what happens next? Well, the businesses follow them. And so those areas left behind, they become stagnant. They decline, they deteriorate. However, as you see, it's on the screen behind me, it's not so much the geographical location that we're concerned with, it's the culture that permeates these areas. Lytle Thomas, founder of the Nashville Inner City Ministry, shared this observation in 1995 at the Freed Hardman Lectures. He said, and this is a quote, he said, "The inner city is a culture that is very different from the middle-class capitalistic thinking that most members of the Church of Christ have grown up with. This difference in culture would be easier to understand if we had to travel around the world to get to the inner city. But because the inner city is just around the corner for most of us, we assume that their mindset is the same as our mindset." End quote. Our next question then might be, well, what is it that causes such a different mindset with those in the inner cities? Well, we must consider the fact that the inner cities are usually characterized by social and economic problems, including crowded neighborhoods, fewer jobs, lower incomes, substandard housing, and a host of other related challenges. And those who are unfortunate enough to live in such areas and lack the means to relocate, they must find a way to deal with these struggles. Some of them will overcome them, but many will spend their entire lives just trying to keep their heads above water, and for some, they will make some very, very poor decisions. Some will turn to illegal means of acquiring income, theft, prostitution, organized crime, selling drugs. Some who are neglected will turn to gangs and other unhealthy relationships for companionship. To cope with the stresses of this life, some will self-medicate with drugs and alcohol and illicit sex. And even those who avoid making these bad decisions in their life, many of them will be stereotyped because of where they grew up, how they talk, how they look, and they'll have difficulty finding opportunities. The result of all this is that many of these people end up homeless, helpless, hopeless, hungry, and hostile. And I want to take a moment to remind us all that these are the very types of people that readily responded to the Lord. The sin sick, the downtrodden, the poor, the sick, the maimed, the diseased, the disregarded, and ostracized. These were the people that the Jewish leaders of that day looked at as scum of the earth. You'll find the modern day equivalent to these in the inner cities. And I'm convinced that if we can show them the love and concern that Jesus showed those of his day, we too will be able to change many lives to the glory of God in Christ. Remember again those words of Jesus that you know well, say ye not, that there are yet 4 months, and then cometh the harvest? Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes, and look upon the fields, for they are white already to harvest. Well, there are certainly special challenges that are related to inner cities. And these special challenges are what I want to highlight now. These are the types of things that we're going to have to deal with as we live as we work with those in the inner cities. Drug addiction, prostitution, gang affiliation, legal problems resulting from their criminal history, broken families, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, mental disorders, unemployment, homelessness, and poor education. And when I say poor education, please understand, I'm not just talking about reading, writing, and arithmetic. I'm talking about poor communication skills, poor conflict resolution skills, poor problem-solving skills, vocational skills, and moral and religious training. Things that most of us take for granted every day. And, well, we at Cordova, at one time or another, we have dealt with every one of these things on the screen behind me. And if you're thinking, now where in the world do we start to deal with such issues? Now you see the problem of inner city ministry. These things present major challenges, not only to those who live in these situations, but any who would seek to help them, whether they be advocates or educators, clergymen. I mean, think about it. It's hard enough to convert someone who has a good education, who had a good family and a good upbringing, but you add all these things into the mix and, well, it becomes pretty daunting, doesn't it? Someone might even think, well, this might be impossible. Think about it. Not even the federal government, with all of its resources, has been able to effectively deal with all these challenges. And so what we need to understand is, though we may not be able to overcome all of these challenges, we can certainly be successful in dealing with some of them. And so this is a key to success in this area of ministry. Focusing on some of the issues in our community that we can alleviate rather than being overwhelmed by all of them. Now, not long ago at Cordova, we were faced with one of these challenges head on. It really caught us off guard, and I think we still wonder whether we could have dealt with this a little bit differently. You see, the Green Line, it runs right behind our building. For those that may not be familiar with the Green Line, it's part of the Rails to Trails Conservancy program that turns old railroad tracks into walking trails. Well, among the many people who use these trails are transients and drifters. And some of these people, they saw the backside of our building and decided that this would be a really neat place to start hanging out. And so this got so bad, it got to the point where anytime, day or night, there were 2 to 5 people staying behind our building. They were doing drugs on our property. They were sleeping on our sidewalks. They were breaking into our fenced-in areas and our outbuildings, and they looked at us like we were the ones that didn't belong when we would show up. And so this was obviously scary for our members, our cleaning ladies, our teachers preparing their rooms, our men mowing the grass, and it caused insurance problems for us as well. And so over time, several of our members had conversations with these individuals. We offered them help. Several members offered them money and various different things. We invited them to the services of the church, and we kindly asked them to find another place to hang out. Well, what we were offering wasn't really what they wanted, and this eventually led to some verbal altercations, and one of these individuals was particularly aggressive and vandalized our building, broke some of our windows out, simply because we asked them to leave, and even purposely scared one of our cleaning ladies that was there alone one day. One Sunday after services, one of our members walked into the fellowship hall to find one of these men standing right there in the kitchen in a building that was supposed to be empty. And so this was very concerning, and we were divided on how we were supposed to handle this situation. We were torn between the responsibility we had to keep our members safe and how to best follow the Lord's example to reach out to those people who were in need. Well, ultimately, as you might imagine, the safety of our members prevailed. But to cause this situation to change, in case any of you ever find yourself in this situation, what we ended up having to do was turn the power off to the receptacles outside they were using, take the spigots off of the water faucets that they were using outside. We had to weld a door shut, and we had to get the police to make regular routine visits through the area. And finally, reluctantly, they decided to leave. Now, we would have liked things to have gone a lot differently, but those people, they weren't receptive. And safety was an issue. In the end, I think we did what was right. And so, yes, we have to be willing to suffer for the Lord's cause. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to be providers for our families, 1 Timothy 5:8, and I think that involves providing protection. And so the lesson we learned from this, I suppose, is, well, you can't win them all. Sometimes safety does become a concern. However, difficulties and dangers notwithstanding, we are still commanded to preach the gospel to every creature, all nations, all ethnicities. And the gospel is still the power of God to salvation, to the Jew, to the Greek, to the black, to the white, to the rich, to the poor, and to the rural and urban man. We can't afford to let unfortunate situations like the one I just described to taint us so that we become jaded towards reaching out to lost souls. On the other hand of the coin, there are few experiences more joyful in the Lord's work than to see someone change from a person who uses drugs and uses profanity, who is belligerent and blames everyone else for their problems, to see that person change into a respectable, kind, generous, God-fearing person is a reward that is worth the labor, and a reward that is encouraging to a congregation. So how then can we overcome the challenges of inner cities? We want to talk about some very practical ways that we can overcome some of these challenges. Now, these are some challenges, these are some approaches and programs that I'm going to talk about that we at Cordova have used to do so. Now, Cordova may not be considered an inner city congregation by all, certainly not to the extent that Midtown or James Road or Coleman Avenue would be, but nevertheless, as people continue to move out of the cities and further into the rural areas, we have found ourselves facing the same challenges that are described by inner cities. And so I want to share with you, we've done our best to adapt to these problems. And so I want to share with you some of the things that we have done, some things that we have learned. And the first thing I would instruct us to do is, first of all, we need to change our perception. That is, if we stereotype all these people in the inner cities as poor soil, people who aren't worth our effort, well, that certainly needs to be one of the first things that change in our congregation. Similarly, if there are those in our congregation that think that maintaining an upper middle class suburban culture in the congregation is the most important thing, even despite reaching out, even to the extent of excluding those that fall outside of that demographic, well, that needs to change. And if this is our mindset, we would probably be better off to sell our building and move to the suburb. Or better yet, just learn to love all souls, right? Once we've done this bit of house cleaning and soul searching, once everyone's on board with the real mission of Jesus Christ, then the next thing that we have to do is strategize. We need to strategize as to how we're going to reach these people. I mean, it's really not realistic to expect that they're just going to wander into our building one day. I mean, sometimes it happens. Most of the time it doesn't. Got to remember, Jesus said, "Go ye therefore, not stand ye waiting at the door." What did Jesus do? What was his methodology? Luke wrote that Jesus went about doing good and healing all that were oppressed of the devil, for God was with him. Acts 10:38. Miraculous abilities aside, Jesus went out to the people. He went to where they were, and he offered his help to them. He used whatever abilities he had. Clearly he had more than we have, but he used whatever abilities he had to help them with their struggles. He didn't just go around saying, "I'm praying for you," or as James said, "Be warmed and filled." Now, even though there is great power in prayer, Jesus didn't stop there. He did good to them. He did what he could to help them. We too must consider, if we want to open the door to these people, we need to decide, we need to strategize as to how we can help them with their struggles. John said, "Whosoever hath this world's good and seeth his brother in need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion for him, how dwelleth the love of God in him?" 1 John 3:17. What can we do to really help them? Jude pointed out that sometimes compassion makes all the difference. Jude verse 22. When people learned that Jesus was helping them, when they learned the help that he was offering, then they came to him. We can't sit around waiting for them to come to us when we haven't done anything to cause them to come to us. And so the real question is then, how can we help? How can we help these individuals overcome the challenges in their lives so that they can see the love of Christ? After all, that is supposed to be the hallmark of the church, right? "By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, when you love one another." John 13:35. How can we show them that love? The next thing we have to do is, while we make these efforts, we have to keep our expectations real. Some brethren, they will start an outreach ministry, and just after a short time, if they haven't seen a number of baptisms or Bible studies, and they just quickly conclude that this is a wasted effort, I would bring to your attention, to your recollection, the occasion when Jesus was traveling through Samaria and he healed 10 lepers, Luke chapter 17. Remember how many of them came back to thank him? Just one. Just one. Therefore, we should not be surprised when many take the things that we offer as help with little or no response. So, brethren, let's not be weary in well-doing. And perhaps, maybe the 10% that the Lord saw, maybe we'll see 10%. And that will come back and have such gratitude, they will fall at the Master's feet and serve him for the rest of their days. The next thing we want to do is, and this is the one I really want to spend more time with, is tap into the resources that we have available in our congregations. Congregations, the body, it's made up of many members, and our members have different interests, different abilities, backgrounds, and different spheres of influence. And this is where it may be different from one congregation to another. What approach might be good for us at Cordova may not be the best approach for you. And so we need to evaluate our congregations. And we need to know our members well enough to know what are their backgrounds, what are their interests, what are their spheres of influence, what can they bring to the table. In other words, we need to find our niche. What's the best way for our congregation to meet these struggles? For example, at Cordova, we have a member named Phil Carver. Now, some of you may know Phil. He's in the business of insurance and investments. But for us, he's our deacon over benevolence. And he's really the perfect choice for this kind of work, and I want to tell you why. You see, Phil is very passionate about benevolence because he grew up in a poor family. His father was an alcoholic, and I did get his permission to use his name and his background. His father was an alcoholic and never even had a job. His mother raised 4 children by herself and struggling to provide them. This was before many of the government programs that we have available today. Their utilities were often cut off. They often did not have the money to buy groceries. They moved all the time. They didn't have a car or other transportation. One day, one of the elders of the church, I think Brother Mosier mentioned him today, A.C. Ivy, walked into his room, or into their house, and I think he had got some kind of information, and he went straight to the kitchen and started opening up cabinets and saw that they had no groceries in the cabinets. The church helped him. The church didn't just help him one time, the church persistently helped him. And that made a lasting impression on Phil Carver. And now he is very compassionate to the poor. And this is the kind of man, if you have one, this is the kind of man you need over your benevolence work. Because this is the kind of work that can open doors and show the love of Christ to the community. You don't need somebody with a tight hand on the money that don't want to let anything go. You need somebody with some compassion and some empathy. And this lays the groundwork so that people might hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, I'm going to break the cardinal rule now of using self as an example. See, my background is I was a drug addict when I was in my teen years, in my early 20s. And I ended up in prison where I started reading my Bible and came to the truth. Because of that background, I've been passionate about things like jail ministry, recovery groups, and I've had a lot of success in counseling families that are dealing with addiction. For a while, I facilitated a support group that met at our building once a week. Now, that was put on hold because of the COVID shutdown. But it was through that effort that we did a lot of good, reaching out to people in the community and some within our congregation who had struggles that we didn't even know about. And it was through that effort I met a man by the name of David Irvin. Now, David Irvin, he started attending Cordova because of our support group. And he has a more extensive network of contacts in this area than I do. He has a great conviction for this work as well. And Lord willing, he's going to be starting that program back up for us soon. I say these by way of giving you just a few examples of finding people with backgrounds and abilities and interests as part of it, so that you can start outreach ministries into your community. Now, this doesn't have to be limited with people with tragic pasts. Does your congregation have members with special skills, things that they might love to teach? You know, we have a couple of ladies at Cordova who are really good cooks, and I've recently been tossing around this idea, even mentioned it to the elders, about starting a ladies group that meets to share recipes, to cook those recipes together, and then either enjoy them together or deliver them to people who are sick, shut in, or in need. You know, cooking is also a life skill, one that many young ladies do not possess today, and so this also expedites the command for the aged women to teach the young women to be keepers of the home. Titus 2, 3 through 5. It also provides a means by which our ladies that are new to the congregation can get connected. And it might even provide an opportunity for our neighbors to start frequenting our buildings and also provide an opportunity to teach the gospel. And then, of course, the food that results of this can be donated to people who are in need. Friends, I call this a win-win-win situation. This is just another example. We're not doing this one yet. I hope we will. I was visiting a congregation while I was on vacation not long ago, and they had a similar program that some of the ladies met and they quilted together. I know this because the Sunday that I was visiting there, at the end of worship services, they donated some of these quilts to their elders. Now, these types of programs may not seem like much, but let's keep in mind that there's a biblical account of a woman by the name of Tabitha, better known perhaps as Dorcas, who used her ability to sew clothing to show benevolence to others. Acts chapter 6, 36 and following. And this woman's influence in the early church was tremendous. Not one word about how many Bible studies she had. Not one word about how many she baptized. It was her service and her sacrifice, her love shown to others, that was the key. Does your congregation have members that have connections to local schools, to hospitals, to nursing homes? These are connections that you can use as a starting place to launch outreach ministries. I'll share with you some of the ways in just a few moments how we did this. Do you have school teachers in your congregations? Teachers who actually love to teach and who would love to help those who actually want to learn? Would they perhaps be interested in starting a tutoring program in the church building that meets at the building for children that are local to the church? Do you have members who have vocational skills who they love to teach to others? Now keep in mind that what one retired person uses as a hobby could be a life-changing skill to someone who has no work skill. So what we want to do is this. We want to go to these members of the church and we want to encourage them to take ownership, to take leadership in their own ministry. And we want to ensure them that they will have the facilities and the backing they need to do this. Of course, that means that we're going to have to get elder approval on this. And if need be, we help them get it started. And then we turn it over to them. We might even preach a sermon one Sunday morning on Dorcas to kind of get the excitement built up on this. Now, some of these ministries, they may not seem like much at first. But over time, we're going to have a few successes. And those lives that will be positively affected by this will be passionate about those ministries that brought them to the truth, or they might be passionate about another ministry. And they're going to bring a whole new set of skills to the table. They're going to bring a whole new sphere of influence to the table so that our ministries can expand. And so if you think about it, what we're going to do, we're going to start out small, and then we're just going to grow naturally. We're just going to be steadfast, and we're not going to give up. Start slow, have realistic expectations, and eventually the work will grow. And so now I want to share with you some, as means of kind of a practical application, some examples of ministries programs that Cordova has used. Now, I don't mean this to come off as if I'm saying that at Cordova, we got it all figured out. We got it all together, folks. No. No, we're learning like everybody else. You may have it together better than we do. But this is what we've done. These are the things we've seen some successes in, and maybe this will help you. First of all, I want to mention the James Road Food Drive. Now, Phil Carver started this work as a way to reach out to families who were struggling financially. At the time, Cordova was in the high rent district, the ritzy neighborhood, and there wasn't really a lot of need for this kind of thing in Cordova, but Phil still had a mind to do it. He didn't care where the people were. He wanted to help people who were hungry because of his background. And so one day he met with John Shannon, who preaches at James Road, and they worked out a partnership. Phil started by taking up $1 a week in one Bible class, and then people started bringing more money. They started bringing bags of groceries, and then it became a congregational effort, and now it's been going on for over 30 years. At first, Phil wanted to pair up. He wanted to put a Cordova member with a James Road member, and we would go out in pairs, and we would canvass the areas around James Road, and we would, well, didn't take long for John Shannon said, Phil, where we go, white people don't go. And so, well, hearing John Shannon say that, we decided to take his word for it. And so we decided that we would be the supplier, that would be our role, and they could be distribution, and they could reap the benefits of this. And so Phil went down to Kroger, and he worked out a deal with Kroger, ended up getting tax-free plus 10% off. Pretty good deal, right? And since that time, now we find ourselves as more of an inner-city congregation. So what did we do? We didn't cease doing the James Road effort. No. We just decided to start up a similar ministry for our area. So now let me tell you about the Dexter Elementary School Partnership. Phil called the Dexter Elementary School not far from our building, and he and I went down and met with the guidance counselor one day. We told her about our interest in helping needy families in our community, and we asked if there was any way, without violating any kind of laws or privacy, if she could provide us the names of people who were truly needy families, and we would buy them some groceries for Christmas. She loved the idea, and so she come up with the idea to send an email out to all the families of the students. And she had some questions about, to kind of narrow things down to the truly needy families. We ended up buying groceries for 50 families that year. And we used that same discount at Kroger to get them a lot cheaper. And as a result, we've helped many families. We've established a good rapport in our community. We have had several family members from those school members to visit our assembly, and at least one school faculty member, and one precious soul was baptized into Christ. We've been doing this now for just 2 years. Then we had what we call, for lack of a better term, community prayer requests. This one we got from House to House, Heart to Heart School of Evangelism, the idea. If you're not involved in that program, I highly encourage it. We got this idea from Rob Whitaker in that program. This was one we've only done once so far, but we plan to continue doing it. We went door knocking in our community and informing them that, this time we wasn't just advertising a meeting. We went out and said, we want to help our community. We want to be any kind of help that we can be. And so we had a sheet of paper we had drawn up with things that we thought we could offer. It included things like prayer, yard work, grief support, biblical counseling, Bible studies, etc. At the end of that day of canvassing the neighborhood, we had a list of names, emails, phone numbers. Now, most of those were prayer requests. And so what we did is Sunday after services, or during services, we record our services anyway. We took a clip of the video where we offered prayer for them specifically, and we emailed it to them. 2 people requested Bible studies, and one of them asked for a biblical counseling because they struggled with alcoholism. One of those Bible studies went on for 3 months. The man, sadly, he still has not obeyed the gospel, but still much good has been done. He has been converted from believing theistic evolution to now creationism. He has went from believing that, not being sure whether the Bible was the Word of God, to now knowing for sure that it's the Word of God, to not knowing whether Jesus was truly a historical character, to now absolutely understanding Jesus is a historical character. And so now we're still trying to convert him from his Greek Orthodox background, which has been rather difficult. But he still attends our services from time to time. Since Brother Bland's coming up here, the doom is sounding. Let me just skip ahead and to our support groups, because this one was my niche, and maybe I'll be able to come back and talk about ICU gift baskets. This one was my idea. Of course, it relates to my background in drug addiction. Support groups were a very important part of my recovery, at least until I transitioned to a point where the regular meetings of the church fulfilled the same role. And while I was in rehab, it was a well-known fact that Alcoholics Anonymous was the first thing, or it was at first patterned after biblical concepts. Many people not only get clean and sober through rehabilitation, but they dedicate the rest of their life to God. I was one of them. And so sadly, because of political correctness today, few support groups today will give anything other than the most vague reference to God. And some of them even forbid the name of Jesus Christ from being brought up. Some of them will forbid the Bible from being quoted. And so what I see is millions of people in these programs looking for a better life. Millions of people who could potentially be an army of highly motivated, convicted souls. But the devil has orchestrated things in such a way that these people are partially helped by God's principles, but rather than this being emphasized where their help's coming from and potentially being a bridge to God's full help in their salvation, instead they're just pointed to some vague higher power. Well, I'm for getting back to acknowledging the real power behind recovery. I'm for saving both the body and the soul, enjoying sobriety and salvation. I mean, why would anyone want to escape a hell on earth and then end up in another hell for eternity? I can't imagine. Did you know that the first support group, the one from which all other support groups are modeled, is the church? Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, bear ye one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. That is the key concept of a support group. 1 Corinthians 15:33, evil companionships corrupt good morals. That's the basis for a concept in recovery called change playgrounds and playmates. I could go on and on subjects like repentance, forgiveness, restitution, accountability. All these are concepts of support groups that are based on biblical teaching. And so what we taught in our support group was, instead of looking at these meetings as a mandatory thing for the rest of your life, which is what most teach, rather won't we consider them as a bridge to something better, and understand that God created a support group called the church of which he wants all men to be a part, one that is superior in all ways to all other groups. And if you're going to go to a meeting for the rest of your life, why not go to the meetings of the church and save the body and the soul? If you're going to read a book for the rest of your life, like the AA Blue Book, why not read the Black Book and save your body and your soul? If you're going to follow 12 steps to sobriety, why not follow 5 to salvation? And if you're going to stand and say, my name's Bruce Hatcher, I'm a drug addict, why not just say, I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and be saved? It just makes sense to me. Do you know there's people out there attending these 12-step meetings that are more faithful in their attendance to those meetings than some members of the church are to the meetings of the church? What could they do for the Lord? We've had some success in this program, but I believe the greatest success is still in the future. How much time have we got, brother? A couple minutes. Let me just quickly tell you about our ICU program. ICU gift baskets. I don't remember whose idea this was, probably Phil. He's kind of known as our idea guy. We put gift baskets together. It had little things like snacks and tracts and various other things a person might need staying over in a hospital. And we went to the ICU rooms and we delivered these baskets. This is where some of our members who worked at hospitals played a key role in getting this worked out with the hospital staff. And you should have seen these people. When we walked into the ICU rooms, I personally walked into 2 rooms where one was either dying or had just passed. These people were speechless. They didn't know what to say. They cried with us. We just walked in and said, we just wanted to show you the love of Christ today while you're going through this difficult time. We wanted to pray with you, and if we are intruding, we will be glad to leave. You should have seen it. You should have seen the look on their faces. As a result of that, we had several people visit our services. We received cards, and even though it wasn't our aim, we even received several checks to continue that work. Friends, I have tried it's been I want to remind you before I close that all this hinges on love, folks. All of it hinges on love. We got to show the love of Christ. That is the basis of all of it. And brother, my aim here today has been to highlight the challenges of inner city ministry, to give some insight that we at Cordova have gained in meeting and overcoming these challenges. And if I'm able to accomplish one more thing in this message, I hope that it will cause us to give more thought to the demographic around our congregation, to the problems that they face, and the resources that we have in our congregations so that we might be more effective in blessing our community and giving God glory. I appreciate this opportunity and your attention.